Welcome to the second episode of the Mendez Movie Report Podcast, covering film news that caught my interest for the week of May 4th, 2026. I am your host and namesake film critic Luis A. Mendez. If you want to check out more of my work, you can visit mendezmoviereport.com or find me on all social media, whether it be Letterboxd X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Reddit, or even Award Expert and Gold Derby under Mendez Movie RPT. And I promise to all you that eventually there will be a proper intro with an intro theme and clips and all that good stuff. But until then, we are starting this from scratch, so no intro theme just yet. But I'll tell you what, listening back to parts one and parts two of the first episode, there's definitely things that I can learn from already. I'm looking at trying to get better with my notes to get prepared for the podcast. I quite frankly, I need to get better at having less because I don't have enough time to edit this as much as I would. I think this was going to flow a lot better though, because I'm not going to be dead tired at 2 in the morning attempting to record this one. And I do want to get these mic levels right. I feel like the mic levels on part two of episode one weren't as good. But I'll tell you what, it is interesting because tonight I didn't get to record as early as I probably want to or will typically do on these Monday evenings, because I had to go see the press screening, my first press screening in some time now, because of things that have been going on in my personal life, like obviously having a newborn baby. And I went to my first press screening in months, Mortal Kombat 2. I went to see that tonight as I record this. Unfortunately, I am under embargo, so as I record this and as I publish this, you will have to wait until my review is out over at the Substack, or wait until the next episode where I undoubtedly will cover that. And I went and saw that with my best friend Justin Todd, who is actually one of the biggest collectors of Sonic in the world. And all I will be able to say is this: if his reaction to Mortal Kombat 2 has anything to say, I think Mortal Kombat fans in general will be pretty damn happy. But with all that said, let's get on with this week's news. When this episode drops, it will be May 5th. So happy Cinco de Mayo to anyone who celebrates, whether they actually take it seriously for what it means, or if you want to go ahead and take it as a chance to give you a reason to go get drunk, whatever it may be. Happy Cinco de Mayo. But the more important part, of course, is that it is Mother's Day week, and it's going to be an interesting Mother's Day this year for me, because it will be the first time in which baby mama, my current wife, says it's going to be her first ever Mother's Day. And, this is something that I think she never ever thought would come, a day that would ever come. So it's been interesting, the first time that I've had to shop for Mother's Day gifts that aren't just like trying to get something for my mom. So it's good. So happy Mother's Day week to everybody out there, whether you're a mom, whether you're a mom who unfortunately your kids passed before you, whether you be an expectant mother, a hopeful mother, a mother who unfortunately has faced miscarriage, whatever it may be. Happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. And it's interesting that on Mother's Day weekend, which is coming up, the big event film, which technically I believe should be counted as the beginning of the summer box office, is Mortal Kombat 2. When you would think Devil Wears Prada 2 would have been a better thing to go with. And they even could have maybe have done some kind of like Wicked um, Barbenheimer sort of attempt thing to maybe juice up some box office with that. But apparently they decided to go ahead and have Devil Wears Prada to come out the weekend before Mother's Day weekend. And really, I guess it kind of aligned with the Met Gala for people who are into that stuff. I personally always found it to be kind of a cringe event of watching a bunch of rich people be elitists. and showing off their ridiculously expensive clothing. But hey, everybody's got their own thing. I know there's a lot of people out there who look forward to the Met Gala. So it does kind of match up with that. Plus, on top of that, if any moms didn't happen to see Devil Wears Prada 2 this past weekend, they will obviously get a chance to do so this weekend. But that takes me right into my review of Devil Wears Prada 2, which is just in time for this Mother's Day week, because obviously this is a movie that has a very, very big female audience. And I can still vaguely remember where I was when the trailer for The Devil Wears Prada dropped back in 2006. I mean, that makes me feel old because that's 20 years ago. I was in my final year of high school, and because I wasn't a film critic yet, I could pick and choose what to watch, so I never got around to Prada. It wasn't some deliberate avoidance because it's skewed towards a female audience or anything like that. Uh, you know, I just never got around to it still. I was curious, especially with Meryl Streep earning an Oscar nomination and the film growing beyond its source material because it is based on a novel, into a modern day classic, one that plenty of people rank among their all time favorites. I know a couple of female and gay critics that I follow on Letterboxd that this movie is on their letterbox for. This is a big movie for some people out there in their movie in becoming a cinephile. And there was even a recent stage musical, but it kind of flopped. It didn't really go anywhere. But now one of the best musical stage adaptations out there. Um, but 2 decades have passed, and here we are with a legacy sequel, which they've simply titled "The Devil Wears Prada 2." And it's interesting because the original book has actually had two sequels already written for it, and it's interesting because I remember a couple years ago when the first sequel of the book came out. My wife had got, I think she was like in a book club, and they actually sent her a book club version of that book. But this movie is completely 100% unrelated to those books. This is its own original story following up the 2006 film. It has nothing to do with those sequel books, from what I understand and what I've been told. Um, so with the legacy sequel coming out, and now I'm a film critic, so I can't really ignore this world and these characters any longer. So it's interesting. I went ahead and did a double feature where, because I didn't get a press screening invite to this, for whatever reason they decided to keep it just to the Orlando and Miami area. Those of us in the Tampa Bay area didn't get a chance to see it. But I decided, let me do a double feature. On Friday, I'll go ahead on opening day and watch The Devil Wears Prada for the first time, which is available on it's available on Disney Plus. I think it's also available on HBO Max, but don't quote me on that. And then I'll go to my local theater and check out Devil Wears Prada 2. Now, before we get into the new film, I need to address the first movie because, again, I spent 20 years not watching it, and it might affect how you. I personally do think it's going to affect how you feel about the second one. And I have to admit to you that I finally watched The Devil Wears Prada, and it left me actually pretty underwhelmed. Now, from what I understand, the source novel leans less comedic and tracks, with a bit of a sharper arc of the protagonist losing herself under the influence of quote unquote the devil, her boss, Miranda Priestley, or Presley. And the film opts for a lighter tone with a tad of a more hopeful ending than the book. It tweaks certain character dynamics though that were kind of hit or miss, like her best friend's personality, which was a big part of the book. Her boyfriend's profession. And from what I understand, the boyfriend is much more interesting rewritten in the book than he is for the movie. And even softens Miranda slightly, though not consistently, in my opinion. Um, I will say what really didn't work for me with the first Devil Wears Prada movie is that I found these characters so unlikable. I mean, with the exception of Nigel, who's played by Stanley Tucci, um, like the runway workplace feels outright toxic, and I know that's the point of it, but it's kind of weird that the movie doesn't make its own mind on like how toxic we should be accepting that this workplace is. Like, I'm getting a lot of conflicting messages from the movie about the fact that it is obviously a toxic place to work at, and yet everybody's saying that you should be so proud to work there. Um, I don't really feel like the Miranda character meaningfully redeems herself. Emily, who is ironically played by Emily Blunt, I think she came off more as a bully than an ally. So when you get to that finale where they try to give you a bit of a happy ending for Emily, where she agrees to help our main character find some new clothes and such. I don't know. I didn't really feel that that was earned. Anne Hathaway plays obviously the main character, Andrea, or quote unquote Andy, and she gradually becomes everything she claims she wouldn't be. And it's interesting because I've heard this thing for 20 years about this: the boring boyfriend in The Devil Wears Prada is the real villain. And look, the Nate character is so hysterically severely underwritten that from the very first scene, I could tell how awful they wrote this guy. But Andy treats him poorly and jumps into a romance with an even flatter character who feels parachuted into the story halfway in. So I think people are have too much smoke for Nate. I think Nate got away from a person who allowed herself to get worse as the movie went on. And look, I know that that's the whole point of the book and the movie, that she lost who she was, and then it leads to the ending where she leaves Runway. But it tries to have its cake and eat it too. Like the whole thing with Miranda giving her the recommendation in that final scene where Miranda acknowledges her secretly. Um, so overall, it just, I was very underwhelmed and disappointed with the Devil Wears Prada. So if you're out there and you're a big fan of Devil Wears Prada, I'm sorry. I was really really looking forward to it. I thought I was gonna enjoy it. I thought I was gonna maybe add it to my list of fave films of 2006, but I mean, I unfortunately I did not buy into the hype. Um, Now that being said, obviously I went to the sequel with low expectations because I literally just saw the first movie and ended up being disappointed by it. And to the movie's credit, though, it did address some of the issues that bothered me about the first movie. The biggest improvement is that the characters are simply more likable. Andy feels more confident and grounded. Emily's closer to what her personality should have been in the first movie in terms of like what matches with her actions and her character. Miranda, I think, is given a more deliberate type of humanity. And she actually has a legit redemption arc in this movie. Obviously, Nigel, once again, played by Stanley Tucci, is to stand out. Um, all the arcs of these characters land in a more satisfying place compared to the uneven, bleak, and sort of endings, bittersweet endings, whatever you want to call it, of the original. So clearly, the writers decided they wanted to have a bit of a more happy thing going on with this sequel. The film will deliver what fans love from the first one. There's fan service here that will absolutely work for its target audience, and people are gonna love seeing these characters. Again, they're gonna love seeing these characters get more fulfilling conclusions. Um, and you know what? Despite all of my issues with these Devil Wears Prada movies, you know, I haven't gotten to Meryl Streep and her performance as Miranda. She's so clearly having a great time and a fun time playing this character. Her performance, I think her performance is pretty magnetic, even with how cold the character is, particularly in the first one. It's easy to see why it's become so iconic, why it got so much love that she ended up getting an Oscar nomination for the first movie for playing this character, and why ultimately the character became popular enough that they decided to give her a full blown redemption arc in this sequel. Um, But it's interesting because the smoothing of the edges does come with some trade-offs that puts me in a conundrum as someone who was bothered with some of the bleakness and negativity of the first movie, because the sequel does introduce contradictions that don't line up with the original. Andy is excited to return to Runway, even though that clashes with why the whole situation of her leaving at the beginning of the movie, at the end of the last movie, excuse me. Miranda goes from this intimidated, inscrutable figure to someone who's like hosting parties and having this safer, conventional personal arc. Even her marriage to Kenneth Branagh's character, he's actually, I was expecting drama from that. He's a pretty straightforward, supportive husband, which I guess is nice to see. Especially with the way that these movies seem to treat the male characters, especially the straight male characters. But I don't know, like at the same time, it did kind of feel anticlimactic, especially with someone of Branagh's range. Um, Not just storyline is wrapped up, but it's a little bit too neatly at the same time, contradicting how Miranda treated him in the first movie, especially in the big lead up to the climax of that film. So while the characters are more approachable and the arcs are more satisfying, the film for me feels blander, like it's trying hard to please everyone, whether they're big original fans or detractors. There are other issues too, though. The direction lacks the style and specificity that I actually appreciate in the original, opting instead for more generic presentation. One of the things that I really liked about the first movie were like these scenes, like when Andy is starting to change how she dresses and the way that it shows her evolution as the workdays pass by. Or the scene, or the opening scene, which I thought was genius, showing these women who dress so glamorously, every inch of them, even their lingerie, compared to Andy's more like casual style. I thought that was a perfect way to start the movie. But that's all, that style's really gone from here, even with having the same director. It's more generic this time around. Um, the film leans heavily on celebrity cameos, and apparently there were even more that were cut out of the editing room, and it falls into the usual legacy sequel trap of overusing callbacks. And I have to say once again, the romance subplot is very, very boring and forgettable in this one. I was really taken aback over how lazily written that was. Honestly, with the way that they wrote it, they may as well have just given the whole supportive husband arc thing to Anne Hathaway. Like, just have it that she's been married and have the supportive husband. Um, in the end, The Devil Wears Prada 2 both improves and regresses on what worked and didn't work for me with its predecessor. It's very much a movie fans. It's very much for movie fans of the original. If you are not already on that wavelength, it may leave you cold. It may leave you apathetic. Look, I may not simply be the target audience here. I am a boring cis straight guy who actually watches the Super Bowl for the game, and I couldn't tell the difference between any brand of fashion pieces, even though I do think, even though I can appreciate a woman in good fashion. Um, but either way, I landed in the same place I did with the original, a straight up C plus. If you are a big fan of the original, though, you will enjoy this. I think a lot of the Devil Wears, I've been seeing this, and we'll address audience scores down the line here soon. Um, I think if you are a massive Devil Wears Prada fan, you're gonna be pretty happy with this one. And I've even seen some people that weren't crazy about the first movie, that they actually thought that this one was an improvement. I think it's an improvement too, but not enough for me to like bump up the grade compared to the first one either. I would say the last one's a weak C plus, where this one's a stronger C plus, if that makes any sense. But look, if you're not a fan, you're probably better off like just waiting to see it, because it's going to show up on Disney Plus by the end of the year anyway. So look, Mother's Day weekend's coming up. If you want to take your mom to see this, she's a big Devil Wears Prada fan. I guess you you could go take her to see this. But that is my verdict on now that I've seen both Devil Wears Prada movies. Netflix has announced a notable first as Greta Gerwig's upcoming Narnia adaptation, which is basically an adaptation of The Magician's Nephew, the prequel to the entire Narnia series that, from what I understand, has never gotten a film adaptation. Um, yeah, that movie is now shifting from a holiday 2026 release to a spring 2027 release. The film is now set to debut on February 12th with a planned IMAX rollout, which is going to be a first for Netflix. But the big one is that this will be an exclusive 54-day theatrical window before hitting the platform. This move comes roughly a year after Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos publicly dismissed traditional movie theaters as outdated. And Ted Sarandos did actually show up at the Oscars, and there was a pretty nice joke during the intro monologue, taking a bit of a shot at Ted's comments about going to the theater and claiming it's an outmoded uh, way for people to go and see movies. I think this says a lot of things. First of all, you're looking at the power that Greta Gerwig has amassed because of her success as a director. There's a woman who she's directed 3 movies so far, and all 3 of those movies ended up getting a Best Picture nomination at the Oscars. Um, I'm Lady Bird is a great film. I do really need to rewatch it to make up my mind whether it's in my top 20 of 2017, which I think was a great year for movies. Um, Little Women is really good, a really solid film to add to an already solid 2019 slate. I have to say though, I was not a Barbie fan. I was not on the Barbie wagon. I watched that movie twice, really trying to enjoy it, and I just did not enjoy it as much as other people did. I remember like losing my mind watching it, like getting to these critic regional groups like that only have like 5 Best Picture nominees. I'm like, what are people seeing that I don't like? It just did not work for me. The comedy wasn't for me. I thought the story lost its momentum in the third act. I thought the America Ferrera monologue that people go crazy for, to me, felt like a forced thing. It's just it was my least favorite of the 2023 Best Picture lineup, which is a solid Best Picture lineup, but one that I don't adore and worship to the levels other people do. Um, but that being said, the fact is that regardless what you think, Greta Gerwig has obviously amassed enough gravitas that she can get Netflix to do this. But at the same time, I think Netflix did show a little bit of fear at Avengers Doomsday and Doom Part 3 by moving it from winter to spring. And it's interesting because it is supposedly known that Netflix does have awards hopes for this movie, but if this movie's coming out in February 12th, that's gonna make it a little bit difficult to attempt that awards run. It will have to be a massive, massive box office hit that is a big cultural talking point of the year, I think, to overcome that and become an awards contender at that point. It's not impossible. That's how Get Out got into Best Picture. That's how Black Panther got into Best Picture. To a smaller extent, Everything Everywhere, Silence of the Lambs, Sinners, and stuff like that. So it's not that it means the movie's doomed attempting to get into Best Picture, but it is definitely going to make it a little bit harder compared to before, because it was supposed to be this big winter release that was going to be compared right there next to Avengers and Doom 3. But it is going to be interesting because that basically makes it the first real big event film of 2027. And we'll be able to actually talk about this movie by the time we get to the Oscars. It's going to be interesting because I remember like in the 2017 season Oscars, like Black Panther had become this massive hit, and the Black Panther cast was like invited to come to the Oscars, and then a year later they're back because it got nominated for Best Picture. So that was interesting. But I'm very happy to see this. I'm hoping that this means that Netflix is going to give more big theatrical releases for some of their big films. It's been annoying to watch them have these, because sometimes they do have these big crowd pleasing movies. Last year's Frankenstein was a big hit with audiences. In fact, there was such a demand for this movie that at my local theater, the Tampa Theater, which was one of the theaters that did a limited release of the film, even after the movie came out on Netflix, there was a demand to get it back into the rotation, and the Tampa Theater got more screenings for the movie. That's the kind of thing that I think Netflix is going to have to try to hit if they do want to compete for that Best Picture win. Because what's cost them Best Picture wins in the past is having the more serious movie that struggles on a preferential ballot. So yeah, all around, I think this is a positive. I'm happy that Greta pulled this off. I'm happy that I'm going to be able to get to see this Narnia film on the big screen, and I'm hoping that it is a new trend for the big Netflix event films in the future. Controversial blogger and so-called movie film news scooper Jeff Snyder, a man that actually has me blocked on social media for because I've called him out for his antics, which include him confessing publicly to taking part in sexual acts during a screening of a film that will go on to be nominated for 11 Oscars. He never said which film that was, though a lot of people have had their guesses whether that was Poor Things or Everything Everywhere All at Once. And for the record, I did not make that up. He is the man who publicly claimed that on Twitter. You can go look that up. He's deleted the original tweet, but he actually still has the follow up tweets where he elaborates on doing this. And then this man wonders why he has the negative reputation that he does. I do not understand how two people who actually know what they're doing and are professionals like Perry Nemroff and Scott Mans continue to do a awards seasonal podcast with him. But we all have stupid friends, I guess. But he really caused a stir because there was a report that came out in which people said that Tom Cruise was blaming director Christopher McQuarrie for the recent box office struggles of the last two Mission Impossible movies. And as a result, Tom Cruise reportedly would not want him in contention to direct the upcoming third Top Gun installment, which Joseph Kosinski will not be doing that film. Kosinski clearly has been doing his own thing. He directed another Best Picture nominated film in F1. He's got this big Miami Vice movie that he's working on. But people need to look closer at Snyder's actual reporting. It actually suggests something far less dramatic, and that's simply that both men might be looking to take a break from working together. There's no animosity involved here. And I can buy that because, Cruz is clearly trying to expand his horizons into other serious work. He's got this Digger movie coming up, which everyone knows is going to be a big potential Oscar play. And, McQuarrie, I got to believe after you've just been doing Mission Impossible movies, it's time to do something else. Though to his credit, I believe he was one of the writers on Top Gun Maverick, which was an excellent movie. I actually like the last two Mission Impossible movies. I do think they're I would rank them lower on the lower end among Mission Impossible movies, but my take is that the first Mission Impossible is legitimately one of my favorite films in 1996. All the others, well, the second one I don't like. The rest, however, I actually think are pretty enjoyable B plus films. So I'm I think it's not everything's going to hit with everybody. The last two Mission Impossibles, it really was time for that series to start wrapping up. I don't think I would have done an AI entity as the final boss of Ethan Hunt's story, but it is what it is. I don't think I think this is nothing past. There's nothing more here than just two dudes who have decided to take a break from working with one another. That's it. Um, so as much as I would like to dog on an unprofessional clown like Jeff Snyder, I can't. If people actually read the report, it's not what it says. And this, of course, the rumor got really ramped up by Jeff Ewig over at Real Updates, who he's got his own own can of worms and things that make you want to take a shower when you read about them. But that maybe I don't know, maybe that's what make it takes to be a scooper, maybe to be a creep. But yeah, I don't think there's much fire here as much as people are trying to create a story with this. Meanwhile, Bong Joon-ho's next project, the animated film "Ali" about a piglet squid dreaming of appearing in an ocean documentary, has been picked up by Neon, the very folks who distributed Parasite. All the way to a Best Picture win, the first Best Picture win for Neon, and would basically kick off Neon's strategy that they have not backed up on using the Cannes Film Festival to guide them on what to compete to what to campaign for award season, and really leaning into more international and tour cinephile fare. But they have their eyes on the 2027 release, a potential run of the Cannes Film Festival's top prize. Not many animated movies have attempted that. The project has reportedly been in development since the release of Parasite way back in 2019. And in the interim, he had his more divisively received Mickey 17, a movie that I thought was just okay. It might honestly be my personal least favorite of Bong's film. But I knew there were some people out there who actually championed that movie. All I'm gonna say is I wish that movie had been more the second half throughout, because the first half was easily the one thing that kept me from liking that movie more. But look, Bong, I was not on the Parasite train like a lot of other critics were back in 2019. It's definitely one of the best films of 2019, no doubt. I need to rewatch it to see how high I would rank it now. But personally, I there were like three movies competing for Best Picture that year that I liked more. Um, 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, The Irishman, I would rank all above Parasite. Um, but it was fun to see that movie pull off history and pull off an upset on Oscar night. And Bong did do Memories of Murder, which I personally think is his best film. And it a movie that I highly recommend every fan watch, especially if you're a big fan of Zodiac, because clearly Zodiac took a lot of um, uh, inspiration from what I think it's pretty much a masterpiece, Memories of Murder. Um, but it's going to be interesting here. He's going to go ahead and attempt an animated film, Neon, picking it up and thinking about even competing with for it for the Palm um, at Cannes is very interesting. It kind of makes me wonder if this might be something special here. If we're going to get Bong to bounce back after the Mickey 17 um, I would say disappointment, but if you want to be diplomatic about it, divisive reception. Nintendo and Illumination have announced a new film that they plan to slate for releasing on April 12th, 2028. Coincidentally, my wedding anniversary. If I'm still married, then we will see. Speculation points to this being a third Mario animated film. Obviously, the first two movies made boatloads of money. But expectations remain cautious. There hasn't been anything that's been officially announced. For all we know, it could be a Star Fox movie because there's been talks about doing a Star Fox movie. That after kind of introducing him in the Nintendo world of the Mario film, Mario Galaxy film. Nintendo is also fielding competing bids from Universal Pictures and Sony Pictures for a Metroid adaptation. I believe supposedly Universal's pitch is to go really like gritty and um, really go for the aesthetic and seriousness of the games. I don't know what Sony's if Sony's like trying to look at some other tone. Warner Brothers, I believe, does still retain the rights to Pokemon films. Sony is, of course, developing at the moment a live action Zelda project, which should be out next year. Um, Look, at this point, all I'm asking for from Nintendo is a halfway decent film adaptation because I have not been unimpressed of late. I did not like either of the Mario movies. I did like Detective Pikachu from back in 2019. I thought that was a fun, solid, go to the theaters B plus flick. I didn't mind Ryan Reynolds voicing Pikachu. I think he did. I honestly think he did a pretty good job for the most part. I did get a kick out of seeing Bill Nye, in a Pokemon movie, but other than that, I just really. I've given up that Illumination is going to give me a good Mario movie, so I just hope that whatever else Nintendo is developing, is something that I end up liking a whole lot more than what I've seen from the Mario movies. There was some news in regard to new Oscar rules, but I'm going to be waiting to cover that for the next episode. So even though I'm going to be a little bit late than a lot of other people on that, I'll cover that next week. So it's time to go ahead and look at what happened over the last weekend's box office, in terms of new releases, at least. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is stormed out to 200 plus million worldwide. Much better opening than the original. It is proving that this brand still has juice. Like I said, this is a movie that, as someone who admits that they didn't like either of the two movies, again, this is a sequel to a movie that means a lot to other people out there. Like, legitimately, there are people out there that adore that movie, and they are coming out in droves to see the sequel. And I think it's going to have a good hold because, again, it is Mother's Day weekend coming up. And, I don't think a lot of moms going to be asking to go see Mortal Kombat 2. Um, critics were mildly positive. Last time I checked, 78% on Rotten Tomatoes, 63 on Metacritic. Audiences have been content, not necessarily like enthusiastic. 3.4 on Letterboxd, 6.9 on IMDb, 87% on the popcorn meter. And I do think, I believe this is the last major event film of the spring box office. I've seen other people argue that's the beginning of the summer box office. I just don't see this as a summer box office film. This does feel to me like the end of the spring box office season, and ended with a bang because this movie is going to make incredible amounts of money. I would not be shocked one bit if there is a push to potentially get a third film out there. And honestly, with as much fun as these performers, specifically Meryl Streep, have doing performing as these characters, I wouldn't be surprised if they're down to do it. Uh, Meanwhile, Angel Studios' gamble on Andy Serkis' animated take on Animal Farm has completely faceplanted at 3 million opening, pretty bad. But the real damage is the critical reception. Last I checked, 24% on Rotten Tomatoes, 28 on Metacritic. That's worse than the Mario Galaxy movie. And the audience scores, toxic. Last I checked, 1.8 on Letterboxd, 2.7 on IMDb. Not even enough data for a popcorn meter. Last I checked. Look, I haven't seen this movie yet. As I record this, hopefully I should catch it tomorrow. Um, but I gotta tell you, based on the marketing that I saw, I have a feeling that I'm gonna be in agreement with critics and audiences. I really don't know what someone of Andy Serkis caliber was thinking doing this. To make this move, first, the animation doesn't look good. It looks like it craps all over the source material. And in a time that we need to be fighting fascism, and certain folks are trying to push communism, I think a movie like this is needed more than ever. And it is really unfortunate that it looks like it's a absolute atrocious adaptation of one of the great books of all time. By the way, outside of the box office on the streaming side, Netflix and Skydance Media swapped the animated film that actually has Michael B. Jordan in it. Um, it's landing exactly where these kind of releases tend to. Critics, last I checked, 65% on Rotten Tomatoes, 54 on Metacritic. Audiences, however, have liked the movie pretty good. Last I checked, 3.5 on Letterboxd, 7.4 on IMDb, 85% on the popcorn meter. I have to say, I wish I saw the movie some of these people did. I did watch Swapped. It came off to me like every other forgettable straight to streaming Netflix movie, even with the pretty impressive voice cast that they have for this film. But hey, I'm happy for those folks out there who enjoyed it. Now, in terms of what's coming up next weekend at the box office, this upcoming weekend, we have what I again consider the first true summer box office event film with Mortal Kombat 2, ironically dropping over Mother's Day weekend of 4 weeks. This is the sequel to the 2021 film, clearly banking on a course correction, most notably with his decision to recast the central protagonist. We are putting the original character of Cole to the side, and now we've got the Johnny Cage, who a lot of people were angry was not in the first movie, played by Carl Urban. Um, Something that in theory should win at least some of the skeptics that were not big fans of some of the changes that were done in the first movie from the source material. Um, I have a full review up for this one. When embargo breaks over at the newsletter, I will talk about my review of this movie in the next episode of the podcast. As I said, as I'm recording this, I just came back from my press screening, first press screening in months. Um, in fact, I am right now staring at my soda that I got for Mike to sip on at my screening. Um, I'm expecting that this is going to do pretty good box office, and I have no idea what the critical reception to this is going to be. I cannot tell you what it's going to be. Um, we'll see when the embargo breaks, but I have a feeling that audiences might end up liking this one more than the first movie. And if there's any counter programming out there for anybody who's maybe wants to go out on Mother's Day weekend with the family, but they're not in the mood for Mortal Kombat and watching bloody fatal fights like that. And for whatever reason, mom doesn't want to see Devil Wears Prada 2. We are going to get The Sheep Detectives, a British film that, I was invited to, I think, two press screenings for this one, but I missed out. It's hitting theaters. Early buzz has been pretty decent. They've actually already had an embargo release, and it's the reviews have been pretty good from what I've seen. So it could be a very viable family friendly alternative. I'll definitely give it a watch, and maybe make some mention of it on my on the next podcast episode. But that's basically it for this upcoming weekend to keep an eye on Mortal Kombat 2 and the Sheep Detectives. And in terms of things that are also on my mind that have nothing to do with film, my Tampa Bay Lightning were eliminated from playoff contention this past weekend, losing in 7 games to the Montreal Canadiens, the very team we handled with a gentleman's sweep back in the 2021 Stanley Cup Finals when we repeated as champions in the middle of our three finals runs, which unfortunately we did lose that third one, but we did go back to back, winning the first two. It's a disappointing end, especially after 50-win season, home ice advantage. I really was wondering if there was a return to the finals on the table. It did feel like this magical season where everything was kind of starting to click again as we've been this quasi rebuild team that is good enough to get in the playoffs but can't get past the first round. Um, but we ended up playing catch up this entire first series. We somehow went 1-3 at home in this series. So we actually got the job done on the road. We only lost one road game, and we somehow went 1-3 at home. This group feels like it needs the kind of wake up call that it got after that embarrassing, after the kind of wake up call that the franchise got after that embarrassing first round sweep following the 60-win season back in 2019. I see some people saying that it might be time for a radical change and it might be time for us to change coaches. I don't think that's the answer. Cooper has been an extremely good coach. I think he's going to go down in history as one of the greatest coaches in NHL history. The man has been coaching us for now going on over a decade. He coached us to 4 Stanley Cup Finals. We won 2 of them. Um, the other two, we lost to a dynasty in the Blackhawks in the 2015 finals, and in 2022, we just bumped into a team that was on a mission while we have been tired. We were just tired out team that was losing our energy from constantly going on these Stanley Cup final runs. So that sucked. unfortunately. But what sucked even more, much more, and on a much more personal side, my grandfather on my father's side, Louis Mendez Sr., passed away this past Saturday. My parents were literally walking through my front door to visit the baby granddaughter when my dad got the call. You know, my grandpa was nearing 90 and he had been in poor health for a long time. So it wasn't unexpected, but that doesn't make it feel any less significant. Both sides of my family tend to have a strong genetics and long lives. So I've never really got to, and I've never really got to know my paternal grandfather. So this is the first, my maternal grandfather. So this is the first time I've lost someone this close. I've lost great grandparents before, but this feels a little different. I have clear memories and real conversations with my abuelo, especially about his love for westerns. He grew up in the 30s and 40s and would tell me about going to local Nickelodeon theaters, dropping in a nickel to watch whatever new Western Hollywood was churning out at the time. And since his passing, I found myself revisiting some of those classics. It's surreal to think about the films he experienced on the big screen when they were brand new, stories that, in a small way, now feel like a bridge between us. But I definitely will always credit him for my appreciation and love for what has gone on to become a very niche film genre in the Western. And rest in peace, Abuelo. We will catch up in due time. And that'll do it for the second episode of the Mendez Movie Report podcast. Remember, once again, that if you want to check out more of my work, you can visit mendezmoviereport.com or find me on all social media, whether it be Letterboxd, X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Reddit, or even Award Expert in Gold Derby. You can find me under Mendez Movie RPT. Until next time, God bless, and do me a favor and go watch a great movie.